Well, good morning. This is Brock Lutz. I am Director of Health Services at Hillsdale College and a counselor on campus. And middle of April is usually much more bustling around here. We're usually 100 or 120 appointments a week, and now things are a little bit more calm than that, though we're still reaching out to a lot of students and during this time and talking about a lot of good things. But I think for all of us, we're at a place of trying to figure out. I've had several people ask me in the last couple of weeks, just how do we get through this? How do we manage it? What do we do? How do we get through it in a healthy way? And what kind of tips would we give to people? And I think in one sense, quite honestly, I'm not going to say anything that I wouldn't say otherwise. That as things around us are a bit uncertain and challenging, one thing that I think becomes true is that we need to grab on to the things that are true. I mean, truth is always true, right? And so as we're talking about how to weather this in a healthy way, ultimately, it's not going to be much different from how we would talk to anyone and say, well, here's how to be healthy. And so what I'm going to talk about is 6 different domains that I think are important for us to look at. And I think what's important as well is that we now have the time and should utilize the time to talk about these kind of things. Isn't it interesting that in the last 4 to 6 weeks, we've gotten what we're always clamoring for? We're always saying we're so busy. We busy brag around here all the time. I'm involved in this, and then I have this meeting, and then I have this club, and I have so much work to do, and I just wish I had more rest. Well, now we have the rest, and what are we saying? Oh my gosh, what do I do with all my time? And I think what it's exposed in us is just that we're not very comfortable with silence and with rest. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute, but I think what we want to do during this time is that we certainly want to use this time as a way to say, okay, how do I use this time as a reflective time and kind of look at and examine what's going on. So we're going to look at 6 different domains that I think are important to pay attention to and manage during this time. The first is just foundational, and that is physical health and well-being. If there was ever a time that we need rest and energy, it's now. And so that means we need to be getting good, consistent sleep. And so we need to sleep for 7 or 8 hours a night, not 4 or 5 hours, and not 11 or 12 hours, but good sleep. And we want to be able to go to bed around the same time and wake up around the same time so that we can be well rested. We want to be able to move well. And, there are those funny memes that are out there that, where the family dog is hiding because he does not want to go on another walk. But we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to walk and get out. We need to be able to look to apps and YouTube that is, hey, how can you be in your house and yet do, appropriate cardio and stretching and getting stronger. And, we need that during this time. And then we need to eat well. We need good balanced nutrition where we look at our plate and we see that there's carbohydrates and protein and fruits and vegetables and grains and fats and oils. And we need to eat, things like chocolate chip cookies because they're good for us. But we need all those things in balance. And what I find is that recently I've talked to people who are under eating quite a bit because they don't want to go to the store. And that's kind of how they're dealing with that stress, or they're overeating because they don't know what to do with all their free time. So they spend time just grazing continually. And we want balance in those areas. Physical health is very foundational to that. Related to that is that this is a time for us to look at how we can be behaviorally healthy. Dr. Arnn talks a lot around here regarding Aristotle and how our choices form our habits, and our habits become our character, and our character become who we are as people. And so I think one thing that's exposed as we have more time on our hands is that now we start to see, what kind of choices do I make? How do I use my time? How many hours a day am I on screens? Even though we know there's an inverse proportion between the amount of time that we spend on screens and our level of happiness or our level of contentedness. And, we also look at more addictive kind of things like substance use or self-harm behavior or pornography or shopping or working a lot. And what we start to see is we start to see the things that are maybe out of line in our lives. A really good friend and mentor of mine a couple weeks ago, I was talking with her about this. And she said that during this time, what's happening is that the foundation of people's lives are being shaken and idols are being revealed. The things that we look to for hope and for help and for security that are now failing us. And so we want to be able to see those things because we want to be able to depend on healthy and secure things in our lives and not escape reality by just covering it up with something, which is kind of the essence of addiction, is that there's an unwanted emotion. I don't want to deal with it, so I'm going to turn to something else instead. That flushes really well into the third category of emotional health. And what emotional health really is emotional health is being able to say, how am I feeling? And how am I dealing with how I'm feeling? And so it does take some time to be able to stop and say, okay, I need to think about my day. I love the Ignatian examine prayer as a model of, okay, what was today like? Was it a good day? Was it a bad day? Why or why not? What do I regret from the day? What am I proud of from today? What about tomorrow? What do I hope for tomorrow? What am I afraid of? What do I need? As a way to say, okay, I need to process actually what's going on. And so we also then look and say, okay, well, the ways that I'm dealing with my emotions, do they increase my anxiety or do they make me more sad? Because I need to make good decisions about those too. And you see, as we talk about all these, that realistically, all these different parts of who we are as a human form a whole, and they all interact with one another. My behaviors, my choices, my physical life, and they're all very much interconnected. Then we move into the social category, because it is important for me to be able to say, how am I doing and how am I dealing with life, but also to look at other people and say, how are you doing? And here's how I'm doing, because we are in need of each other and we need to be able to support people and to see that we're better when we're honest and we're open and we recognize that we need other people in the journeys of our lives. And so that emotional piece is important, or the social piece. We now have these new technological ways of doing that and being able to touch base with people, either video or Zooming or those kind of things. And so let's utilize that. Let's connect. Let's be honest if we're not fine. Don't say you're fine if you're not fine. But maybe we even use like traditional ways of doing that, where we shoot someone an email, or God forbid, we pick up a piece of paper and a pen and we tell people, hey, here's how I'm doing. You know, we're all in different ways grieving during this time. And we grieve better in community as well. Around here, for instance, you know, we're not getting to do what we love to do, which is educate young people, at least not in the way that we really think is like the best way, and to be person to person connecting with people. And so it's different. And so there's a grief that's a part of that. So we grieve together and we share those kind of things together as we walk through this. Fifthly, we look at our mental perspective, and what the mental side of us is really about. It's about, what is my perspective in life? What are my beliefs? What do I believe are true? And that, you know, what the old saying is, whatever you believe to be true, you're right. Because if I believe that I can't do something, then I probably can't. If I, so the thoughts are very much connected to emotions, and my emotions are connected to my choices. So it is a time to be able to evaluate what is my perspective in life and how do I engage some of these things. I think I think of Gerald May's Dark Night of the Soul book, which is really a reflection on St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, and some of their writings and poetry. And he starts the book off, I think, in just a wonderful way. He says, "The older I get, the more difficult it is to tell the difference between good things and bad things. Because the things I thought certainly were good, that I thought would just make me happy and satisfy my soul, didn't, and kind of left me wanting in some way. And then the bad things that I thought for sure would destroy me and end me and that I could never, ever endure, those actually were the things that formed me as a person and that did something in my spirit." And he talks about his own journey with cancer, which of course is a bad thing. We would all agree. And he says that of course it was bad and he was discouraged, and then he had chemotherapy and it made him sick all the time. But then what started happening is that he recognized that actually he was getting a lot closer to people from his church because they were giving them meals all the time. And he and his wife had more in-depth conversations. And so he said, I don't know, maybe it was a good thing. But then he had chemotherapy and it cured him of his cancer, which of course is good, but it weakened his heart. And so he then had to have a heart transplant, which is bad. But then he says, when he steps back and he takes the 30,000-foot view, he looks and he says, the person that I was at the beginning of this process, and then the person that I became 15 years later, thought about life in a different way, loved people better, was deeper in his faith, enjoyed every day that he had, saw it as a gift, and that I don't think I would have gotten here without going through this. So he says, I don't know, was it a good thing? And he says, I don't know, we'll see. I think we need to take more of a, I don't know, we'll see mentality. It reflects the spirit of the Reinhold Niebuhr prayer of, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Because there are a lot of things about our current situation that we cannot change. And we need to accept those things, not continue to try to turn them around in our mind and thinking that we're going to change them. There are things that we can change, though, and we need to change those things. We need to work on ourselves. We need to serve people around us. We need to work and be as productive as we can be. And then we need to see the difference between those two. That leads us into our last point, which is being spiritually healthy, which really leads us into those big questions in life. The big questions of, why am I here? What gives my life meaning and purpose? How am I supposed to live? What is God like? And how can I connect with God? And this is a time when we struggle with and we answer those questions. My wife a couple weeks ago said to me, you know, you've kind of been walking around like a lost puppy dog. She said, you know, she said, I love you. You wake up most days thinking, how can you love and serve people around you? And you kind of are doing that all the time. And she said, and now you don't have quite as many opportunities as doing that, you know? And so, and that made me think, well, I don't know, maybe I do that too much. Like maybe I get too much of my identity from that. I need to think about that. I need to evaluate that. And I think what this opportunity gives us is to think about a lot of those kind of things. Gives us the opportunity to think about spiritual life and faith from a standpoint of, maybe this is a time that I can be more of a person of prayer, or who really knows and reads scripture, or who worships God in a different way, or who's okay with silence and solitude. And we work on the disciplines of our faith that are the things that get us closer to God. John Piper, several years ago, after he was diagnosed with cancer, wrote a book called Don't Waste Your Cancer. And he obviously was saying, like, you have this opportunity where you can see things in a different way now. Don't waste that. And I would encourage us all that during this time, let's not waste our coronavirus, but actually let's take it and say, okay, there are things about this I don't like. We'll never look back on this and say, oh, geez, I wish I could go through that again. But we can look back and say, you know what? I was a different person from the beginning to the end of that because I did what I could do to make the best of it, to look at myself, examine myself, and really be the person that ultimately I want to be. And even in the midst of a dark time, or maybe especially in the midst of a dark time, I was able to do that. God bless you. And if you have any thoughts about this, I'd love to hear them. And take care.